Greetings my friends, and welcome to a brand new series. And this series is going to focus entirely upon the campaign map, my friends. This is a much overlooked sort of part of Empire Total War. Although it is a predominant sort of factor within all of the campaigns where you have to use the campaign map to of course move your armies, move your troops around, move your ships around, trade, to set up your towns, to build sort of your empires up. A lot of it can be overlooked, but some of it can actually be used to absolutely wonderful effect. And in fact, if the campaign map is used correctly and used sort of in an efficient way, it can actually turn many of the campaigns in your favour quite quickly, or at least help you on that path to victory. It really can. Now, just before I start, I am not saying at all that everything I'm going to give you here is, the right way to do it or the only way to do it. All I'm going to do here, my friends, is just provide put my sort of experiences I've sort of built up playing Empire Total War sort of onto this video here, onto this series here. And in no way am I saying that this is the only way you can do things, or that I've sort of found every single way to which the campaign map can be a benefit to you. In no way am I saying that, my friends. It's just purely me putting my sort of perspective of what I found whilst playing, whilst campaigning, and how I sort of used it in my campaigns in the past, and indeed in the future. So please don't think that, my friends. And this is also sort of, I suppose, geared towards those who are either brand new to Empire Total War, or those who are sort of starting to sort of get their feet sort of wet with Empire Total War, starting to build up their confidence within the game. And also, I would love if this experience, the veteran commanders as well, were pulled into this, and also put their comments down below, so we can build that sort of pool of knowledge, that pool of experience. Because, believe me, I'm still learning. Even after so many years of playing Empire Total War, there are still many things I still got to learn. And with the wonderful help getting from the council, from all the comments, I'm really starting to help me sort of refine my sort of campaign play, my battle play, as it were. And it's still got plenty to learn. So please don't think this is a definitive guide. This is just me putting my own experiences down onto paper, almost, as it were. So for me, there are a number of sort of factors you can pull into the campaign, or certain things that can really sort of influence a campaign greatly. And that is trade, that is control of the seas, and of course control of the land, certain points with the land, certain points within the sea. There's trade hubs, of course, production centres, towns, building them up, villages, schools. So we're going to be looking at everything in detail, but this is going to be sort of split up into a series of parts, and we'll look at each thing individually in a bit of depth. So today we're going to be looking at something what I could call control points, or I guess you can also call it choke points. And I may be thinking, what's control points? Well, control points, in sort of my definition of it, is it's an area or a part of a sort of a piece of land, or even and today I should clarify, it's going to be about naval, sort of the sea-based control points. So we're going to split into two parts. So it's going to be a naval or sea-based control parts, and then the next episode will be about land sort of base control points. So let's look at this sort of naval control points, and as I was just saying, there are certain sort of points within the sort of campaign map that can be used to control vast swathes of sort of land and sea, that can actually either bring down other empires, or at least really severely hamper their growth, hamper their trade, hamper their income, to the point where it actually could bring down an empire almost single-handedly, or at least help you towards crushing that empire, because they've become so weak that you control a certain part or point on the map that you can actually crush them in much easier than you would if they were allowed to expand without any sort of controls applied to them. And so this is where we're going to look. I've sort of written down on a piece of paper here what I have sort of identified as the main control points. Now, I'm not saying these are all the control points. I've probably missed a few, and there's probably many of you out there who are saying, Mally, you missed this one and this one. Please, if I have missed it, please put it down in the comment section. Let's try and build that pool of knowledge here for this. So the first one, the most obvious one here, is here, the Gibraltar Straits, my friends, right here. This is one of the most vital, most important strategic positions in the entirety of sort of, dare I say, the sort of Western and African subcontinents or continents, as it were. They really is. This is the choke point. This is the control point to end all control points. Because once you identify what this can do, if you choke this off, if you control this point, it can bring down entire entire empires. I kid you not, my friends. I've actually seen it happen where you can systematically over time, you can crush an empire just by controlling this this area here. We'll just zoom in on this here and just show here this point here. As you can see, the crossing between Gibraltar and Morocco. If you were to put a ship or a naval force here and block off, so you could remember, if you've got to have an enemy, so what you're ideally doing is, if you've got enemies in the Mediterranean, so say for example you've got a good portion of the Ottomans rely on the Mediterranean to be able to move out. So does Spain, so does the Barbary states, so does Rome, so does Venice. A good chunk here also of sort of French control here along the Mediterranean here, the southern part of France. And indeed even Austria relies on the Adriatic, which flows into the Mediterranean. So as you can see, a massive, even Russia, with eventually Russia takes Crimea, and that becomes a very, very important trade point for the Russians. So as you can see, there's a huge amount riding on here, a massive amount. A good swathe of the actual world's empires need the Mediterranean to be able to flow smoothly for them, for trade to be able to move through. And always, what you can't see here now is there's just one single trade line. These are trade lines here, these sort of dotted lines here. There's one single trade line that flows through here and then sort of splinters off into the different regions. So you have a trade line moving through here, it splinters off into these different sort of ports. If you control this point with a trade line on it, and you have an enemy nation here, an enemy empire within all this vast amount here, you can pretty much crush their trade down to the point where they almost get no trade coming in at all. Now, please remember, this will not happen at the very start of the campaign. I'm talking about this as you progress. Because remember, you've got to have a pretty powerful naval force to be able to blockade here and hold it. Because remember, you will also have potentially Britain, you've got the Netherlands here, you've got France, and indeed you've got Spain. Now, if they want to get into the Mediterranean, they can throw a huge amount of ships your way to try and break that blockade. So remember, only sort of really hit a control point of this significance once you are absolutely confident you can hold it, and also to the point where you know that you're not going to be able to, once they break this, you're not going to be able to come back and retake it. It is really important that you've got this place locked down with either a very, very strong naval force or the ability to reinforce that naval force very, very quickly. Because if these, as I said, the Spanish or the British or the French or the Dutch or even the Swedish want to come in here and open up trade routes, because remember, once you crush this, you're not only stopping trade route coming in from this way, you're also stopping trade coming in from the Mediterranean outwards into the wider world. And a lot of trade from the New World flows into the Mediterranean and vice versa. So remember, the conditions must be right for you to blockade this. Do not, I'm not saying do not, but I'm saying I recommend not to try and blockade this in the very first few turns of your campaign, because the majority of some of the major empires will already have a significant fleet, a significant naval force available to them. That will allow them to pretty much crush your blockade pretty quickly. But if you, for instance, in my USA campaign, we have blockaded Gibraltar, the Gibraltar Straits. We've blockaded it completely. Nothing comes in and out without our approval. But of course, your allies and those who are neutral with you can still pass through that blockade. They're not blockaded. But only if you're fighting a strong empire and they have a stake within the Mediterranean, and you want to really hit that stake, that sort of income, and also the ability for them to move troops and ships back and forth between the sort of East Atlantic and also the Mediterranean. Blockade the Gibraltar Straits, my friends. That really will do a significant amount of damage. But remember, if they're friendly with you and if they're neutral with you or at peace with you, they can still pass through that blockade. But if they're your enemy, they will not be able to get through that blockade unless they fight you for it. So remember, my friends, be very wary there. If you've got a strong opponent, a strong enemy, they've got a massive naval force, be prepared to stand and fight, or leave Gibraltar alone, leave the Gibraltar Straits alone until you have the force available to be able to really properly defend and hold this strait. Because if you do, you can do significant damage. You really can. So this is the first sort of a control point or choke point, as it were, within the campaign map. So let's have a look now at the second one here, which I've identified. Now this one is all the way over here, right the way over here. Now as you can see here, we've got this, again, a very, very sort of small control point here between Istanbul and between Anatolia here. As you can see, you've got Ankara here, you've got Istanbul here. Now this is significant for two reasons. The first is, eventually with the Ottomans, they start to grow quite a lot of ports along the Black Sea coast here. So remember, this is the Black Sea here, this Mediterranean. So you're effectively, if you control this point, you're controlling a great swathe of the Black Sea, which affects Georgia, the Russians, the Crimeans, and ultimately the Ottomans, because the Ottomans have Moldavia here, which again will eventually, and Bulgaria also they control as well. So eventually you will have ports all along here, all dotted along here. 9 times out of 10 the Russians take the Crimea, and this becomes a major port. Sevastopol is a trading port. It is a crucial port for the Russians eventually. It is their major trade line leading out of the Black Sea into the Mediterranean and out into the wider world. And again for the Ottomans, you will have lots of ports growing up here. As you can see, these become ports here, 2 ports here. I believe there's another port up here as well, and also Crimea, and there's other ports I think that emerge along here as well. Oh, could be there is some there, Batumi, and there should be another one here as well, Sinop. So as you can see, the Black Sea has a great potential here, and eventually all these will become trade ports or sort of shipyards, but a majority of them will become trade ports, and that is why control at this point here is absolutely crucial if you're fighting the Russians, if you're fighting the Ottomans, or if you want to expand into these different regions. You want to control the flow of troops and money for the Russians, the Ottomans, and indeed ultimately the majority of the time the Persians will move in and take Georgia and Chechnya, or the Russians will do the same thing. So again, if you're fighting the Russians and you're fighting the Ottomans and you want to really hurt them in the pocket and also prevent the movement of troops and materials, this is the point to take, my friends, right here between Anatolia and Istanbul. It really is a fantastic choke point, control point here to really take. So let's have a look now a little bit further sort of west, as it were, away from Istanbul and Ankara, and that is between, not too far away here, between Athens and Izmir here. Now you might think to yourself, well, Malad, there's quite a lot of open space here, but look at the control points you can here. There's a control point right here, right by here. If you control this, I know if you could control this you stop this, but if you're not able to control this, but you're able to put a fleet in around this location here, you can indeed control, because if you put a fleet here, the influence of the fleet sort of surrounds this part here. That means anybody wanting to move in has to engage your fleet. If they're your enemy, remember, if they're friendly or at peace, they'll just simply sail past you. If you're their enemy, then you will be able to control here. Now this is looking important. You've got actually quite a number of areas here where you can control. If you're pushed further back towards Black Sea, you can start controlling these points here between these sort of small islands. Even look, this sort of outlet here, this sort of mouth of the Mediterranean here that leads into the Black Sea, you can control this point here. Of course you can raid the ports all along the different things, but again, looking at the controlling of this area, you could even start controlling the area around here. This here could be a good control point, and then if you're getting pushed, you can sort of move in closer and closer and closer towards sort of the land, as it were, until you can sort of eventually move up. If you can control here and here, then you're pretty much guaranteed to seal off everything the Russians have coming from the Crimea or even from the Russian territory itself. The Ottomans sort of, you know, north here of Bulgaria and Moldavia aren't going to be able to move out any of their troops, and their trade is going to be pretty much crushed in here. So again, I know they've got this sort of area here, but again, what we're looking for is the control points. Although you can't stop trade coming from these ports here along for the Ottomans, again, it's all interconnecting. Think of it interconnected. Think of it the bigger picture. Think about if you don't control this and you don't control this, you might control the Gibraltar Straits. In which case, it will matter if you don't control these and they've got these ports open here. But if you are not strong enough to be able to control the Gibraltar Straits, but you want to still do some significant damage and cut off some of the trade lines and some of the troop movements, these are excellent points to look at. They really, really are. And also let's have a look as well, my friends, here at another control point here, which is, but I would say almost say third, fourth on the list here of very, very important control points, or choke points to look at, and that's here. Right between here, look at this, between Greece here and Naples. Look at this port here. If the Ottomans are included, because look, they've got a trade port here in Ragusa, the Austrians would be affected here, in Trieste. The Venetians would be affected here, from Chioggia. You've got here again the Italian states, Ravenna. So again, if you control this here, this portion of the Adriatic moving into the Mediterranean here, again, you are cutting off at least 4 or 5 nations worth of trade and the ability to move their troops from the Adriatic into the Mediterranean. Got some really fantastic positions here that we could control. You don't have to control them all at the same time. Of course, you don't want to overstretch your troops, your military, your naval forces, because remember, this is on condition that you have the ability to hold what you're doing here. But again, remember, you have to be at war with these nations here to be able to hold these points. Again, if you're friendly with them, they will simply move through you here, move past you. But if you're at war with them, you can use this Greek Naples control point here to do significant damage to this trade coming in here from these ports here. So that really is quite important there. And again, we could look also here at Naples, the sort of the Sicilian part here of Naples here, and Tunis. Again, there's this portion here. I know they can probably slide through, some ships will move through this portion here. But again, if you control this, which is a major outlet here from sort of eastern Mediterranean into the western Mediterranean here, if you control this point here between Tunis and Naples, again, a very, very important control point. And as you can see, the Mediterranean is quickly becoming the place where these points of control, these spheres of influence, are really, really important, because they can eventually, especially as your campaign moves further and further down the line, as it becomes more and more embedded, and as soon as you start sort of whittling down the empires, because some empires will just expand massively, their trade will become massive. But again, if you're able to put a foot down on that trade, if you're able to put a foot down on the movement of troops from certain regions, certain areas, it gives you breathing space. It allows your empire to grow. You can crush their empire with their economy, with their trade being hit really, really hard, because you are owner of these points here on the map. So that is pretty much the main sort of Mediterranean control points, choke points as it were. Now let's move a little bit further afield now, my friends. Let's move further afield up here into the north here with Britain. As you can see here, Britain here has a huge amount of potential control points here. And predominantly the English Channel. Look how narrow the English Channel is between the French coast and the English coast here. The English Channel here, Dover, and right on here, Le Havre here, this sort of, the southern part, or the sort of southern tip here of this English Channel here along the French coast. As you can see, a significant amount of trade moves through the English Channel. You can see all these, again, these dotted lines here is a trade moving through the English Channel. Look how much goes through. Look how much. All out United Provinces, France, Sweden, Maratha Confederacy, Mughal Empire. Look how narrow it is between here, this sort of French point here, and also the sort of the English coast here. Look at that. Again, one point here. There's another point potentially between the island here and here. Again, the narrowest point here and here would be ideal. Look at that. And also you could be able to put your ship on the trade lines here. But again, we're going to be looking at trade lines in greater detail later in another episode. And again, here, there's here, right by here, another trade, as I say, here as well, here, even here between sort of right in sort of Cornwall here and right on sort of France and Brest here of France. If you have enough naval forces, you could put two either side of each other, two in parallel to each other, two naval forces, one here and one here, to control the sort of really control the English Channel from this sort of western side, as it were. And again, moving in, look how much Britain's gone here. It relies on Bristol a huge amount. And again, you could control this point here. Again, putting a ship here, putting naval forces here could really, really do a lot of damage. And again, we can see this crossing here. Again, another naval force here would again blockade and control this point here. And again, look at this really, really sort of between Scotland here, between Glasgow and sort of the Outer Hebrides. We're moving into the sort of Hebrideans here. again, you can control a mass. I know you can hit the port, but controlling this area will allow you to get out as well. If you're stuck here and a British naval force comes up here, you've got to fight. But if you're here, there's a chance of you being able to escape as well as really hitting them hard or controlling this point here. So as you can see, Britain has a huge amount of control points, especially along the English Channel here. And then we're going to move up here, my friends. We'll move up into those towards Scandinavia now. And again, this really does have some fantastic points of control here. Around Denmark here, around Copenhagen, as you can see, there are a significant amount here. There's two here. One that leads from Denmark into Sweden, here, just outside Malmo. And then we've got Aarhus here, and again, between Odense here and the capital here, there's another control point. You control these, you block off these, and nothing from the Baltic Sea is going to move into the North Sea. You will control it significantly. But if you can't control these here, because maybe there's some naval forces, enemy forces here, move up north, further north towards Norway, to the coast of Norway here. And here is one point here. This point here, right on the tip here, if you put a naval force here, that really is going to give you access to this trade line. Again, there's only one trade line leading out from Malmo. There'll eventually be a trade route coming from Aarhus, but they will join. This one line here will eventually join. All of them will converge upon this one line. If you control this line, if you control this trade, and again, if you control the ability for them to move troops, materials, guns, munitions out from the Baltic Sea into the North Sea, you are bringing your enemies a real headache, because they've got to then try and find a way to either go into a direct fight with you, or they've got to try and find some other way to sort of move out, and that means they'd either have to move through Norway, come all the way out to Bergen here, and then move out from there, which is going to take them a lot longer. Or if you were to cut off completely here from Brandenburg to Malmo, this point here, you've got the Baltic Sea completely locked down, and the Baltic Sea is going to really hamper Poland, Prussia, Courland, Sweden, Russia. It does a huge amount of income comes from North Sea, from the sort of further afield into the Baltic and all the way in, especially St. Petersburg, which is eventually becomes a real hub of Russian or Swedish trade. So again, there's the control points, and you can even move further up the Baltic here. You can even go between sort of Stockholm, as it were, and Finland here, and you can control this point, so you can control the trade that might be built up along here eventually within this sort of small enclave, this inlet here of the Baltic Sea. You could even control between Finland and Estonia here. This point here would then give you control of anything coming in from St. Petersburg, or even from Karelia here, and even Riga. So again, this is a very important point. As you can see, there's plenty, and not so much here. I believe you probably will get there. Pamu here, and again you could block off that there. But remember, this is all in condition. This is only do these sort of control points if the conditions in your campaign allow it. Do not sort of take this as those things you have to go and do that. You only do these things and use these control points if the conditions within your campaign allow it, or that if you want to do it, or if you need to do it, you maybe need to slow down your enemies for a bit. And one way to do it is to absolutely start dominating the seas here. Remember, there are plenty of those control points on land, but again, we get to that much later on in another episode. Of course, you could, I guess, in theory, maybe patrol between Iceland and the north and sort of Scotland here, sort of the outer Hebrides of Scotland. But again, that is a vast tract of sea here to control. You could patrol it maybe with two naval forces here, and maybe keep the trade line. As you can see, there's one trade line here moving all the way through down here into Britain. So again, that would definitely be a possibility, but it's a much bigger amount of space to control, much bigger amount of sea and to control and patrol. So again, it would draw a significant amount of your forces away from there. It's much better to control the tighter, softer targets, as it were, here of the English Channel, and sort of these smaller ones in Scandinavia here as well. So I think that pretty much covers all that I've really sort of could find, and what I've used in past campaigns my own time. And of course, you could even go all the way through the Norwegian Sea here, control Norwegian Sea and the sort of wilderness here of the Norwegian, and also you could even move into here and the Arctic Ocean. I mean, you really are starting to move into the really you know, the really extremities of the campaign here, and you could even control this point here where you got Archangel again, which could become quite a powerful sort of trade port here for the Russians. But again, to be honest with you, I would only do that if you knew the Russians were using this as a significant trade point. Now, let's move into the New World here, and this does pose a much more difficult challenge in terms of what we're trying to do here. So straight away you see Newfoundland. Now there are points we can access here which would give the enemy difficulty. There's this point here in Newfoundland and between Akvatuk here, or Montenegnis here. And as you can see, you could control this point because obviously France has got money coming through here via trade through this little point here. You can either control it here, or you can control this point here. And again with Newfoundland, you can control from Newfoundland down to Arcadia here, again this point here, so you could block off this and this to seal the French in here from the Northwest Atlantic, being able to move out and sort of strike your assets maybe in Europe or in the Caribbean or even in the New World. So again, if you control these 2 points here and here, that would give you access to that. Or you could even really send a naval force down here, a flotilla down here, where you've got sort of this port here of Tasuka, or Tadoussac here, I beg your Tadoussac, Tadoussac here, which is New France, of course. You could even completely crush off this. Probably by here would be ideal, right this point by here, because then you would be able to stop the port moving out, on any trade moving in from Montreal up Canada here. Again, that would really hit the French if you're at war with them, remember. And also look here as well. Now look at this. You've got here Great Britain's got 360 coming in from Rupert's Land. Again, if you want to do economic damage to the British, if you want to stop them being able to use this Rupert's Land as a place to build up their forces, because as you can see, they're out of the way here. They're so far out of the way here, they could build up forces here and send them out here, and it could be a real thorn in your side. How would you stop that? Then you would, again, you control this access here, these access points here and here between the wilderness here and the Western Atlantic, the Western Arctic Ocean here. You could control these. And again, right by here, this wilderness here in Labrador, and again the Western Arctic Ocean, controlling this and this here would really put a huge dent in the British sort of foray here in sort of Hudson Bay here, which of course Hudson Bay does have also the York Factory, the Northwest Territories here, the Huron, but again they can't use ships. But again, if you want to hurt Britain, access points, control points here. Now if we move further down, as you can see, the sort of the American coast here is open. You're not going to be able to control much in here. Possibly here you'll be able to control from Virginia here. Virginia into sort of Maryland might possibly be a control point here, and indeed even here with New York and Boston here, possibly here, but again you're not going to be doing much damage. There's not really anything going to come through here. These are the points you're going to possibly control, maybe here, but again they're not going to do much damage because it's so open. They can move forces down the coast here and then set sail off here, but the Caribbean does open up a significant amount of opportunities here. Again, you've got these pirate islands and the French islands here, Windward Islands, Leeward Islands, Trinidad and Tobago. They can be sealed off, they can be cornered off here. Each of these sort of sections can be held quite aggressively here. You can stop a lot, although they can move to the north of you, or they can even try and slip through here on the Caribbean Sea through this point here. If you control here and here, you're then forcing them to go this way. If you want to engage them and force them into a naval battle here in the West Atlantic, in the open West Atlantic, then you seal off here and here. Remember, use the map to be able to guide and control. So if you want to send the forces in a particular way, seal off certain parts of the map to force them to go the way you want them to go. And that way then you're engaging them. Maybe you've got a massive fleet waiting out here, and if you seal off this and this, they think, well, actually, we'll divert and go this way from the Caribbean into the West Atlantic Ocean, and there you have a fleet waiting for them. And the same here between Hispaniola here, Cuba, Jamaica, and the Bahamas. Look at all the possible control points here between Cuba and Bahamas, between Florida and the Bahamas, between Cuba and Jamaica, between Hispaniola here and Jamaica. There's so many different points you can control. You could even lock down all of these 4 islands if you had it in you, if you had the ability to do it militarily, navally. You could really seal off this whole almost the whole of the Caribbean. You really could. And of course you've got this point down here which you could probably sort of patrol if you were in charge of or control of Dutch Guyana and French Guyana, and you did that trade. You could even sort of use this area here as a sort of control point where you're controlling who comes in and out of this particular region here. So remember it goes both ways. If you want to be able to control who comes into your territory, or if you just want to seal it off, it works both ways. And again, you could theoretically seal off the Caribbean from the Gulf of Mexico, from New Spain to Cuba here. You could even seal off Florida and sort of Cuba as well. This point here and this point here. If you had a massive sort of, all this was under control and you wanted the trade to be able to flow freely, but you were being maybe harassed by pirates, or maybe the British, or maybe some other nation that has taken over North America, maybe the French, controlling these points here would then seal this off. It would give you access and control of the Gulf of Mexico, allowing your trade to flow freely outwards. Of course, they could raid your trade lines further afield, but you know that this area here is at least going to be safe. And that, my friends, is pretty much it for this. So for the New World, as it were. There's many places. I've probably missed a few of them, but again, if I have, please put them down in the comments, my friends. Please put them down in the comments. And we have one other continent to look at, and that is, my friends, the subcontinent. And as you can see, the subcontinent is vast, with massive open stretches, with very limited abilities for control points. But the main one is here. So we'll just quickly shift to down here. And as you can see, here it is, the Persian Gulf, leading near the Arabian Sea there. The Ottomans have Baghdad or Mesopotamia. The Persians have Bandar here. Now, as you can see, Bandar is to the sort of the west of this point here. If you were to seal off this point here, then nothing from the Persians and nothing from the Ottomans on this side, on the west side here of the Persian Gulf, is going to get through this point here. That is a real control point right there. That is an ideal control point right by there, between the Arabian Sea, the wilderness here, and Arabian Desert, and Baluchistan here, or Persia itself. But ideally here would be perfect, because you're not allowing anything to come, any trade ships, any fleets or troops to be able to move from here. That's perfect control point. And again, you could theoretically use the Arabia in the Arabian Sea here and Baluchistan here, but again, that's a much wider area. You'd have to probably have possibly 2 fleets here if you couldn't seal off this here. But then again, the sheer amount of expanse here is going to unfortunately limit your ability to control Ceylon and Arcot here. Again, there is one area you could seal off, or even here between the Indian Ocean, moving out here, and the Indian, and also the sort of East Indies trade lines here. This would be a pretty big ask here to control this. Remember, maybe 2 fleets here to be able to control it. There's a potential here, but again, the subcontinent doesn't give you much access, giving them options for control here. But my friends, that is the sort of the end of the first episode of looking at the campaign map. I hope this has been some help to you. It hasn't been a great in-depth look, but it's just me sort of, providing maybe some of my experiences of what you could use to help you in your campaigns, what you could use to sort of really put your foot down on your enemies. Not straight away, because if you start sort of trying to use this very early on, you're going to probably pay the price. But as your empire builds, as you're able to put the military forces into position to be able to control these points, control these sectors on the sea, they will pay dividends. It really will. So anybody got any questions? If you're new to Empire Type War, if you just started, maybe started to sort of get your feet wet with it, was a word, and you're just starting to build that confidence in the game, please let me know what you think. If this has been a help to you, what would you like to see in the future? And those veterans who have been veterans of many a battle, please my friends, get your comments down below. Please put down your experiences, what you've done, how you've controlled it, what you've been using, what tactics you've been using. We want to build this well of knowledge here, this well of experience, as it were. But I hope you've enjoyed it. Again, if you've got any requests of something else you'd like to see on the campaign map, maybe let me explain in a bit more detail, please let me know. I wanted to bring a little bit of something different as well to the sort of the channel. And I'm also going to be bringing a few more battles and a few more nations guys coming up as well. Possibly a new campaign coming up as well, so we'll just have to see how things pan out. But my friends, hope you've enjoyed this. If you have, again, please keep your comments coming down below. Thank you for all your wonderful support. Over 2,000 subscribers, absolutely incredible. Can't thank you enough, my friends. Hope you're having a great time whatever you're doing. Please be safe. But until then, my friends, bye for now.